This class in particular, Defusing Hostile People, the World Arena came to us several years ago and asked us to put this class together for them because they have issues, as you can imagine, with unruly people at the World Arena. Sometimes they serve alcohol at some of their events. They have a large number of people there at a time, and sometimes their security staff and their other staff members have trouble dealing with people. So we originally put this together for them, and it sort of took off and became popular with other organizations. We've taught it for utilities. We've taught it for Pikes Peak Mental Health. We've taught it at schools. I've taught this class before at the library. Has anyone sat through this before, or are you all first-timers? So a couple of people have. This is kind of like a verbal judo class, but not exactly. And it's very interactive. So if you have questions, discussion points, please bring those up. All right, so when we talk about hostile behavior, what are some things that you would interpret as hostile? Just holler them out or raise your hand. Yelling. Swearing, bad language. Okay, invading your personal space, somebody getting right in your face. We're going to talk about personal space during this class too. What else do you consider hostile? Throwing things, good. Maybe some property damage. All right, if you go ahead and flip that, let's see the list that we came up with. And you guys mentioned many of the things on this list. Belligerence, aggression, bullying, and we see that type of hostile behavior sometimes in the workplace, but more so at schools. Intimidation, put-downs, belittling, becoming argumentative, harassment. And harassment's actually a crime, and it's one of our person crimes. It's the statute's 189111, and we charge it all the time. Harassment can be anything from phone harassment, which is repeated phone calls at inconvenient hours, or it can be stalking is a form of harassment. It can be excessive emails, but harassment can also be pushing, shoving, finger pointing, anything that threatens or alarms. And this is not quite to the assault level. So while pushing or shoving you is a harassment, if I punch you, that would be an assault. Okay? But I'm sure that you can think of behaviors that you would consider harassing at the workplace or at home or wherever you find yourselves, right? But I wanted to explain harassment a little bit in legal terms. Agitation, and we're going to talk about some signs that people are agitated. Verbal abuse, violent outbursts, fighting, threats. Anybody ever come into the library with a weapon? So we'll talk a little bit about that. Assault. Assaults then would be a step above harassment. That's going to be you get struck, you get punched, or worse. So we have misdemeanor harassment, which is basically, or misdemeanor assault, which is third-degree assault, which is you get punched maybe or kicked. You get injured, but it's not going to be permanent or debilitating. Okay, a weapon's not used. We talk about felony assault. That's where you're going to have permanent injury or damage. You're going to have, or something's fractured. So you could have a fracture. You could have a permanent scar, or a weapon was used during the assault. Suicide threats. Sometimes when people become hostile, they threaten suicide. And what we see with suicidal people is sometimes the people around them are also in danger. They might decide to hurt you or kill you and then kill themselves. Destruction of property, which we've already mentioned, and you guys mentioned this one right away. Bad language, cussing, swearing. So you never hear that here, right? Okay. All right, so now we know kind of what hostile behavior is, and I take it that you guys see that in your line of work. When I talked to the last group at the library, I was surprised at some of the things that they have to deal with at the library. But what do you think causes people to behave that way? Fines? Okay, fines, money. Whenever finances are involved, it makes people a little irritable, doesn't it? And maybe it's not even just fines at the library. Maybe they're having financial difficulties at home. Somebody just got laid off, and some little thing happens here, and that's just the last straw, and it sets them off. It's not really the root of the problem, but it can be the thing that sets them off. What else do you think causes hostile behavior? Okay, and this is something that came up at the last library class, computers. I mean, computers and technology are a huge part of our lives these days. I love technology, and I love my computer. I'm on it all the time. But I could live without it if something happened to it. Some people don't have their own computers. They come to the library to use them, to check email, maybe to do banking, to do other things, but it's very important to them that they get on that computer. So when they can't get a computer, or when they have to wait for one, they become agitated. And I'm sure you guys have seen that. Maybe they're not just upset because they can't get on the computer right then, but there's other underlying factors involved. Maybe their card's blocked because they owe fines, and so they're not going to get a computer today, etc. And obviously, you've dealt with this before, obviously, and you've taken the time to figure out that there's other issues besides just not being able to get on the computer. So oftentimes there are other things going on in people's lives, and the fact they can't get on the computer is just that last straw that makes them upset. What else causes people to be hostile? That's a really great point. She said people's lives are overscheduled, and they're always pressed for time and in a hurry. And I feel like that most of the time. The police department is shorthanded. We're short-staffed. Crime prevention used to be the neighborhood policing unit. We had 15 people in this unit. Now there's just me, and there's a few volunteers that help me out. So I can completely relate to that. And so when someone's pressed for time and they're rushing and they have someplace else to be, the last thing they need is to be delayed conducting business or checking their email on a computer. And that can set someone off. So let's go ahead and flip the slide and see some things that came up. Intoxication, do you see people come in here intoxicated? Really? Remember that this was designed originally for the World Arena, and they kind of helped us with some things that they saw there, and intoxication was definitely at the top of the list. Okay. That can cause some people to become irritated or agitated more quickly than they normally would. Not always. Mental illness can cause hostility, and we have quite a population of mentally ill and people with mental disorders in Colorado Springs, and that could be a whole nother class. We have a crisis intervention team program that many officers are trained in through the police department to deal with people who have mental disorders or are mentally ill. And I'm shocked with, I think our community fails those people a lot. We just don't have things in place to help that population as much as we probably should. And so they're out and about in Colorado Springs, showing up at the police station, going to the library, walking downtown, and as they interact with people, sometimes those interactions turn aggressive because they're misunderstood, or because they don't have their medication, or because of other frustrations related to their disorder or illness. So I'm sure you guys deal with that here at the library. Stress, and we already talked a little bit about that. It could be financial stress, it could be family stress, job stress. You know, I just got laid off from my job, and now my wife's leaving me, taking the kids, my home's being foreclosed on, I can't make my car payment, and it just escalates. And I believe we've seen a lot of that in the last few years. Okay? In fact, when we do this training with police officers, and I teach at our police training academy as well, not just a class similar to this, but also arrest control and defensive tactics and TASER and PR24, and a lot of what I teach is physical, which is why I couldn't stand behind that podium for an hour. But those things we always want to be a last resort after we've tried to diffuse things without them becoming physical. And stress is definitely one of the scenarios that when we were putting officers through in-service the last couple of years that we incorporated into their scenario training, which was someone who had just lost their job, got laid off, and was suicidal. That was our scenario. But they'd gone through all these things, a layoff, a divorce, they were losing their house, they had their car left, and we put role players into these situations, and the officers have to try to deal with that without it becoming violent. And sometimes you can't do that. But hopefully you can. And so there are lots of stressors out there which have nothing to do with checking out a book or using the computer at the library, but which can come to a head here. It could come to a head anywhere, really, but it's just a matter of time before it happens someplace, and it might happen to be here at the library. Do you all work at this branch, or are you from all over the city? Okay. Do you find that you get a different population of library users at the different branches? Okay. I figured that, but because we have different clients in the different police divisions too. Medical conditions and medication reactions. This kind of surprised me when I was researching this class. There are certain medications that cause moodiness, that can cause mood swings, that can cause a little bit of mental alteration when you're on them. And some of those can be things you're on for other things, like painkillers, or you just had surgery and they put you on something. Okay. Medical conditions can also cause people to be agitated and get angry just by the nature of the disease. And I thought that was quite interesting, and I just listed a few here. Physical conditions that aren't necessarily a chronic medical condition or due to medication, but you just have a headache today. You just don't feel good today. All right? You have a sprained ankle today. It's not going to be something permanent, but you don't feel good for whatever reason. So when you have a splitting headache, aren't you a little bit more irritable? Aren't you a little bit more quick to get aggravated? And that surely happens to people that come in here too. All right? Anger and dissatisfaction, you never deal with that here, do you? What are some things that make people angry at the library besides the computer and fines? Anything else? Really? Okay, so people get mad. The library's supposed to be quiet.
That ended about a decade ago.
Really? Okay. Why do people become dissatisfied?
They can't get something there.
So waiting in line, wanting some new release, and they can't get it right then because, you know, it's American. We should have things instantaneously. What were you going to say? Was somebody else going to say something? Okay. Oh, people don't like to leave? So you guys are closing and you kick them out. You tell them they have to leave.
And when something falls apart, things like
Something's supposed to be on hold for them. They waited too long to come get it, or some other part of the process failed or went wrong, and now that item's not there.
we ask them to be responsible. So
Okay, so if they damaged something, lost it, didn't return it, you ask them to pay for it, people become dissatisfied with that? Okay. All right. So those are some reasons people could become hostile. There are others, but we just wanted to do a quick overview. So this is what verbal de-escalation is. Okay, basically it's the use of your voice or spoken word to try to lower the intensity of someone's hostility. When you see that they're becoming angry, you try to use your voice, facial expressions, body language, anything that you can do to get them to calm down before they do something like damage property or become physical or pull a weapon out. Okay? So it's a non-physical response to a potentially threatening or violent situation. I'm sure that you all understand the importance of trying to verbally de-escalate or calm people down first before you just start punching them or grabbing them or pinning them to the ground, right? I mean, it's the same for police officers. It might be easier, sometimes it really is easier to have a physical response first. It really is. Sometimes it's easier just to react physically. But that's not the best way because you can get hurt, they can get hurt, other people can get hurt, and it can escalate from there. And I would certainly hate to see someone seriously injured or killed over a library fine or not being able to get on the computer. And that sounds silly, but if you think about things you've heard in the news or read in the paper, how many times has someone actually died? And when you look at how that incident started, it was something so minor and silly that we just have to shake our heads. Well, we don't want that to happen at the library. Okay. All right. So we're going to talk a little bit too about nonverbal responses, because when you're trying to verbally de-escalate somebody or talk to somebody in order to calm them down, you've got to consider your body language and your facial expressions. They need to match what you're saying. Your body can't be telling somebody that you're frustrated and you don't want to deal with this if your mouth is saying, I understand, or, you know, I can sympathize with why you're upset. Your body language has to convey that also, okay? So these are some things that you want to think about, okay? Demeanor, tone of voice. Your overall demeanor is going to kind of incorporate everything that I just talked about. Your tone of voice is going to be very important. And you all understand how just by changing the tone of your voice, you could escalate or diffuse somebody. Because you do this probably every day, not only at work, but at home, with your friends, with your families. Interactions can really hinge on your tone of voice sometimes. Facial expressions can mean a lot, and we're going to look at some pictures. Your actions and gestures. Think about what you're doing with your body. What actions are you taking? How are you standing? Where are your hands? We're going to see some pictures. You don't want the situation to become worse because of the nonverbal signals you're portraying, okay? And 93% of how we communicate, even if it's on a subconscious level, is nonverbal. Is not what we say, but the actions of our body. All right, so this is just a picture about some body language. What's this picture telling us? Hey, I don't want any problems. Does this look like an aggressive person or somebody who's trying to back off? He looks like he's afraid. Okay.
Looks like somebody's got a gun.
Yeah, and probably they did. I went on the internet and I searched different things and got some of these pictures from TV shows, and most of them probably are involving guns or police or violence. Okay. All right, so here's some other nonverbal communication. So it's important that you can identify not only what you're conveying with your own body, but what the other person's conveying. So both of these stances are what? Kind of closed off and defensive, right? Don't even say a word. Don't even talk to me. Don't even come any closer. I'm not listening. And it's kind of intimidating. Now this one, on what would be your left, the facial expression is different. So how does this one look different than the one on the right? The one on the left is more, I'm a little bit concerned, I am listening, I'm irritated. The one on the right is conveying what?
All right.
Don't even mess with me. Don't even come any closer. I don't even want to hear it. So even though they both are standing with arms crossed, just the facial expressions can even change what that means a tiny little bit. Do you all see that? Okay, next slide. All right, now these are all primarily just facial expressions. Now just take a minute to look at all these. Some of them are funny, huh? And look at what emotions can be conveyed and what can be communicated by just looking at the faces. Does anything particularly stand out? Well, how can that one not stand out? What's that conveying? He's scary. Weird. But if you actually saw someone that looked like that had that facial expression, what would it be conveying as far as emotions and demeanor? Fear? Anger? Hatred? Maybe that person has reached the point where they're not stable, and it might be impossible at this point to reason with them. If somebody's facial expression gets to this point, you might be backing off and saying, okay, we have to call the police or we have to get help because it's beyond what we can handle. All right? What about some of the others? What about this one, the redhead? Thinking, sad, concerned, sort of pensive. Anything else stand out? This one, isn't that a happy face? You'd probably like to see more faces like that in here.
William Shatner, he's thinking.
The William Shatner one is the one in the upper right, and he's thinking. Captain Kirk always had the weight of the world on his shoulders, right? But he always saved the day in the end. But that's kind of what that conveys.
The middle guy up there with the glasses, he looks kind of like he's kind of open.
Mm-hmm.
He's kind of friendly.
Right. This middle picture, she said, he looks kind of friendly, an open expression, looks like somebody who's approachable that you could talk to. That's good. That's maybe what you need to think about when somebody starts becoming irritated or clearly they're upset by something, is you don't want to look like Jack Nicholson, right? Maybe you want to open yourself up a little bit, not to put yourself in danger, and we'll talk about that, but so that this person can see that you are concerned and you're not blowing them off. And sometimes just that in itself can diffuse things a little bit. Okay, next slide. All right, so you might be trying to de-escalate a situation, which was happening here, but is anyone's body language in this picture at conveying that they want the situation to calm down or de-escalate? No. If you watch this clip, she was trying to de-escalate these two people, and they were both saying there's no problem. But what's their body language conveying? Yeah, quite the opposite. The body language of all three of them is conveying anything but we're all calming down and we don't want a problem. Which goes back to what I said. You could be saying one thing, but your body could be telling this person something else. So make sure that you're self-aware as much as anything else, and that you're not giving mixed signals to a person that you're trying to deal with. And then it's important that you can recognize in that other person when things are getting worse and when it's time to back off because that person might be escalating and might be about to become violent. What do you think some signals of that might be? Clenched fists. What? A red face. Clenching the teeth. The voice level goes up. Physical proximity. They suddenly get closer to you. They lunge at you, or they just lean their body into you, right? Or they start poking a finger at you, or doing things that close off their posture, like crossing the arms, hands on the hips. Okay, good. All right. Now, we want you to appear non-threatening to people that you're trying to calm down, but we also want you to be safe. So you need to appear open and relaxed and non-threatening while still making sure that if that person lunged at you, you could remain balanced and that you could get out of the way. And you want to position yourself in such a manner that you always have an out. Does that make sense? So if you look at the picture on the upper right, she looks fairly relaxed, right? Not really a confrontational posture. But she's in what we call kind of an interview stance, or that casual conversational stance, where her feet are a little bit apart, her knees are not locked out, right? So it's easy to shift between legs. You can easily move out of the way if you need to. And her hands look relaxed, but they're in a neutral position, about where I keep mine most of the time. So they're right around here. Okay, or by the side. So that means they can easily come up to block. They can easily come up to grab. If your hands are in your pockets, it takes longer to get them out and react defensively. If your arms are crossed or they're clasped behind your back, that's all takes longer if you need to react defensively. So the best thing to do is to keep your hands kind of in a neutral position in the middle of your torso and not have them wrapped up with things, not be carrying things, not have them in your pocket, not have them crossed. Does that make sense? And then this expression, because sometimes you might be seated when you talk to people. So again, he looks very open and like somebody you could talk to, and he's kind of leaning into the person like he's interested in what they're saying, but his hands are neutral again. They're not underneath the desk. They're not crossed. They're not in pockets while he's sitting down. He's got one hand up and the other one on the desk. So again, they're in that neutral position so that if someone lunged across the desk, a hand could come up defensively. The chair's also pushed away at an angle a little bit, and it's kind of hard to tell from this picture. But the chair's not pushed all the way into the desk so that you're pinned in there between the desk and the chair. It's pushed away a little, so if you had to get up suddenly, you could. And those are things you want to think about. You want to think about how you position yourself when you interact with people so that you don't get backed into a corner, so that you always have an out, and so that if you're standing and talking to somebody, it's not easy for them to push you off balance if it becomes physical. All right? So you don't want to lock your knees out, have your feet completely together, have one foot, completely behind the other. You want to keep your feet about shoulder width apart and your knees bent so that you can shift your weight easily between your two legs and you keep your balance over your hips. This is where your center of gravity is. Does that make sense? Now, you don't have to get into a big fighting stance and let somebody know that you're on guard, but you can look non-threatening and be in a safe stance, and really remember to keep your hands free and kind of neutral here in the mid-level. All right, now we're going to talk into a little bit about tactics. So now we know somebody's irate, they're upset, they're angry, they're getting agitated for whatever reason, maybe many of those reasons that we listed. Now what do? What are some things that you already do or that you've tried in the past? Listen. Okay, separate them from the crowd, from the main lobby, or move them to where it's maybe quiet or more controlled.
Get on their side. So it's not you against them, you're on their side against.
Physically or mentally? Okay, so try to understand where they're coming from. Anything else that you've tried, whether it's worked or not? Yes. Okay. Ask them how you can help make things better.
I try to use warm.
Good. And I don't know if you all heard her. She said her tone of voice, she tries to keep it warm and concerned. Even if she has to say something negative, she tries to put it in a positive way. And those are all great things.
Repeat what they're trying to.
Repeat back to them what they've just told you. That indicates to somebody that you're listening and you heard them and you're not just blowing them off, right? Diffuse early. So the sooner that you can recognize the situation's going badly, the sooner that you can start trying to calm the person down or de-escalate them, the less likely it is that it's going to go too far, right? It's easier to kill that Tyrannosaurus Rex dinosaur when it's still in an egg than after it's full grown, right? So think about that when you're trying to diffuse someone's hostile behavior. Sometimes distracting the individual can help. And sometimes people get angry and they're on this track. They're in this train of thought, and if you can just derail them temporarily and get them away from that anger because of any distraction, then you can come back and calmly talk about the issue later or even a few minutes later. Has anyone tried to use distraction when somebody's been hostile here? No one's tried that technique, huh? If somebody's focused on you and they're angry with you, and it's not personal, we'll talk about that too. It could be whoever, whichever staff member's there, they're going to be angry at. But now a second person enters, and now that anger is distracted. Now it's no longer just focused on you. Maybe I'm angry at all of you, but now it's spread out a little bit.
I asked someone to
She said she's called security before, or called for security while someone's been upset with her, or you said cussing. So that in itself is a distraction. If you're cussing and swearing at me and getting angry with me, and you're fairly comfortable that I'm not a threat, and then I turn to someone and say, can you please have security come immediately, or I call on the phone or a radio and say, I need security here immediately. Now she might be thinking, oh, crap. Right there's a distraction, but now they might be hopefully processing a little more logically and thinking, okay, I better really rein it in because now I'm not just talking to the librarian. Now somebody from security is going to be here, or the police are on the way. Okay, so she talked about a situation where someone was angry and irate with a girlfriend and tried to follow her into the women's bathroom. And she ended up getting other staff members and security to diffuse that, and it worked. Now, sometimes that can escalate people more, and you don't know. All of these techniques are trial and error. Not everything's going to work on every person. What de-escalates one person might make another person more hostile. But all you can do is try it. And remember that if one thing doesn't work, then drop it and try something else. You don't have to stay focused on, well, we started out by distracting the individual, so we need to keep trying to distract him. No, if that's not working, go to something else. The situation with we get domestic violence situations that pour out of the home into other places. We have it all the time. It comes into the workplace, into the gym. I mean, at a gas station. Wherever people are, their angry boyfriends, girlfriends, husbands, spouses can be, right? And so sometimes that comes to the library, which it sounds like in this situation it did. Just something to think about. And we as law enforcement are guilty of this as well. We always focus on that person that's the aggressor. You're focusing all your attention on that guy that was trying to follow her into the women's restroom. What about taking the other party and just removing them from the situation? That's an option for you as well. So if you see her, in this example, let's say you see him following her, he's angry, he's irate, you see her walking towards the bathroom, which I'm assuming there isn't another exit, another way out of there. Now she's going to be in a room with only one way in and out. Maybe you intercept her before she gets there, and you take her into an office. You take her out of the library. You remove her from the situation. So that's just another aspect. It's just another way to look at things. You know, there isn't a set thing that you have to do to rectify a situation, so kind of think outside the box. But we all get focused on that aggressive person. But if it's another individual that's the object of that aggression, remove them from the scenario. An example of distracting is I was on a call for service, and it was a domestic violence call, and the two people were still arguing when myself and the other officer arrived. Normally we try to separate them and talk to them individually, and they were just arguing with each other and angry with each other and wouldn't listen to us. And we raised our voices, and they raised their voices and just ignored us. So their table had some food on it and some sandwich fixings, and the other officer sat down at their table and made himself a sandwich. And their reaction was much the same. All of a sudden, they stopped, they were quiet, they looked at him, and he said, "Whenever you're finished and ready to talk to us, you let me know." And that really distracted them. And it was enough to just stop their trains of thought, and then we were able to separate them and talk to them. Is that always going to work? No. It worked in that situation. So that's all I can tell you. Sometimes you're just not clicking with a certain person, and this happens as police officers too. It happens as instructor-student. These are situations I find myself in. I'm just not clicking with this particular individual. And I know that it's only going to get worse, so that's when you have to step back and say, you know what, let me find somebody else that can help you. Or let me go and find someone else that might be able to understand your issue a little bit better than me. And it could be just that your two personalities aren't working in this situation. That's going to happen. There's nothing wrong with that. We have a workplace violence class that's really good that we teach through the police department as well. And one of the things we bring up in that is that we don't get to choose our coworkers. We don't get to choose our clients normally. If you own a private business, that can be a little bit different. But when we go to work, we're put into circumstances where we are around people we may not normally choose to have in our lives. And that can be a difficult situation in and of itself. What were you going to say? She's talking about you guys are in a circumstance where you do have coworkers around you. It's not just you alone. And sometimes not just a different personality type, but sometimes that coworker steps in with something you didn't think of that works with that person. So take advantage of that. Refocus the person's attention on something positive. Have you guys tried this? So the person's upset that they can't get on the computer right now. Is there a way that you could refocus that person temporarily onto something positive? And you guys know your workplace. You know what you have to work with. No? There's no way you could do that? You're saying yes. Yeah. So she's talking about offering options. So, I understand how frustrating it is that you can't get on the computer right this second. Maybe there's some other way I could help you. Maybe we could look into getting a laptop. Or is there something I can look up for you real quick on my computer, so that you don't have to get on that one? Or are you interested in classes? Because we have a handout about that. So just offer other options, refocus them on something else. Or sometimes she said she'll just start a conversation with the person to get them distracted from having to wait on the computer. Changing the subject, and that's kind of also what you're talking about. Just change the subject, get them off track, get them away from that idea that's making them angry or frustrated or dissatisfied. Lighten the mood or make a joke. Sometimes that offends people, but it can work. And again, it's going to depend on that person's personality. Another call for service, domestic again. This time, the people were already separated. The male half had left. An officer and I were talking to the female, and she just, was angry and going off and wouldn't let us get a word in edgewise. And she was in beauty school, so she had one of those fake heads that they practice cutting hair and doing hairstyles on her table with some beauty school stuff. And so the officer said, now look, I understand that this situation is upsetting, but don't lose your head over this, And he picked up that head, and that made her laugh a little bit, just enough to get her off track so that we could talk to her. That was a circumstance that just happened to open itself up for a little joke to be interjected. You're not always going to have that opportunity, and some people may not be happy that you're making light of their situation. So again, this is not something that's black and white. You're going to have to just try things and see what direction things are going once you've made an attempt at one of these tactics. You have to be ready to change direction and modify your actions as circumstances change. You have to be able to adapt as the situation unfolds. You can't just be set on one path. Listening is very important, because how do we feel when we have an issue or a problem, or even if we're angry and we just want to vent and somebody's not listening? Doesn't that make us more angry? Because we aren't getting that catharsis from our venting. If no one's listening, it isn't going to make us feel better. Next slide. Asking a disrupting question that they didn't expect. Well, and this may not be over the computer issue, it might be over something else. Maybe somebody comes in and just starts ranting and raving in general about how unprofessional this library is and how they hate the Pikes Peak Library District, and they're just completely down on it. So maybe when did you start feeling this way? People don't expect you to say something like that. They expect you to get defensive and to say, well, I don't need to listen to this, you need to leave, or, you're just being rude, I don't want to hear it. But if you truly ask them, well, when did you start thinking this way? Or when did you start feeling this way? Or when did you start seeing the library like this? Or when did we start doing something that caused you to feel this way? Sometimes it makes them think for a minute. One, they weren't expecting compassion or for you to try to understand where they were coming from. And then it actually makes them think, doesn't it? Because maybe they aren't sure when they started feeling that way. Now they're having to think and process information. So if you ask them something that they didn't expect, sometimes that can help. Has anybody ever used this effectively?
Along the same line, you can hand them a "how are we doing" card and ask them to fill that out.
You can.
And that kind of does the same thing and provides them a moment to stand up if you're asking them to write it down.
Right. And because I think people expect you to become defensive, that if you hand them a comment card and say, we really don't want our library users to feel this way about us. If there's something we can change, we want to do that. Would you mind filling this out? It can work. I'm not saying it always is going to. Deal with the person's feelings. Obviously, you don't want to make that person feel like you don't care. You know what? I understand that you want to use the computer, but so does everybody else, and I'd like to be checking my email right now too, so just have a seat. How would that make you feel if somebody said that to you? Okay. Or, I know you want to check out this book, but you owe all these fines. So maybe you should go get a job and pay your library bill. That is not being compassionate. So try to address the person's feelings. Be assertive, but do not be aggressive. That's very important. You want to remain professional, and you certainly want to remain assertive, but you do not want to come across aggressive yourself. Really important not to cross that line. Remain professional. To me, that goes together. And all of that can hinge on you not taking the actions of this individual personally. Because as soon as you take what this person is doing personally, they start pushing your buttons, then you can't remain professional. Then maybe you start getting escalated and you start getting aggressive instead of just being professional and assertive. Uh-huh. Yeah, that's a good point, and I'm really good at doing that, and sometimes it makes people mad. But if you don't let people push your buttons, sometimes they aren't getting the satisfaction from you, so they'll just walk away. Or they'll just start behaving a little bit better. It can irritate people because they're not getting a reaction out of you, but it's always better to not let your buttons get pushed. Ignore things that aren't significant. Ignore the cussing, ignore the yelling, ignore things that just don't matter and don't let them bother you, and just listen for the significant things and watch for any significant body language that might indicate that person's going to become violent. But be very good at ignoring stuff that doesn't matter, like insults, personal insults and things, just let it go. And if you need practice in this, you're welcome to do a ride-along when I take someone to jail sometime. Because you get really good at ignoring all the things you hear from the back seat. I can ignore pretty much almost anything now. I only hear things that matter. Try to figure out what the actual issue is, and we touched on this in the beginning, that the actual issue may not be the library fines or the use of the computer or that new ebook isn't available for download yet. The issue might be something else. Now, I'm not telling you to be counselors, but if you being a counselor for 30 seconds helps you avoid violence or a scene in the library, calms that person down enough to get them on their way, then give it a try. So you could say something like, ma'am, it just really seems unusual to me that you would be this upset over this new ebook not being available yet. Is there something else that's bothering you that we could help you with? Or is something else going on that you'd like to tell me about? And maybe they don't want to tell you about it, but maybe just showing that little bit of compassion makes them feel a little better. It's just another tactic that you can give a try. So I'm hearing from the group that you would get too much talking from people. So then I would move on to this next one, and they start doing that, try to focus on some solutions for them. Again, I'm sure you're a library that you have resources that you could give people if they're having issues in other areas, right? At least the other group I talked to said they did. You know, that if someone needed financial resources or counseling resources or medical resources, that you guys have a place to point them. So that would be the time that I would probably start interjecting those solutions. And then if you're just getting nowhere and now they want to talk to you all day, there comes a point when you have to stop the interaction. And maybe it's just a matter of saying, oh, excuse me, for one, I have to go do this. Or that's when you kind of signal to one of your coworkers to come over and you start engaging in some other aspect of your work. But you guys know tactics to get out of a conversation. So when that person's no longer a threat and now they just want to talk to you, figure out a way to end that, but don't make them mad. I mean, don't say something like, I know I asked you what was wrong, but I really didn't need a 30-minute dissertation on what's going on in your life. Try to find some tactful way to make it a short conversation, okay? And again, please don't take the actions of that person personally. If you do, you're done. You're not going to be able to effectively control or deal with that situation. Try to use a third person when speaking, especially when the person's really, really upset. Because if you start saying, well, you need to do this, you need to do that. You sit down. It makes that accusatory tone, and those using you is accusatory. And it makes that person feel even more defensive. So try to use the third person if you can. Wow, it's really interesting that somebody would be so upset over not being able to get this book today. It'll be here tomorrow. But you didn't say you. You didn't say, why are you? I can't believe you're upset over not being able to get this book today. So try to keep it kind of neutral. What will it take to fix this? Very neutral. And you're not saying, what can I do for you to fix this? You're saying, well, what will it take to fix this? So you're just keeping everything neutral. Do or say something the person doesn't expect. We've given examples of this in other aspects, but always keep that in mind. If you do something they didn't expect, gets them off of that train of thought that's causing them to stay angry or hostile. Don't become angry or hostile yourself. And if you start to feel that happening to you, that's the time to step away. Get someone else to talk to the person. Or leave them, maybe you're talking to, and I don't know if you ever do this. Some of the other venues we teach this course, sometimes you bring someone into a private office and it's you and that person. First of all, if you're dealing with someone who's hostile, don't ever put them between you and the door. Try to position your workstation or stand so that you can always walk out the door. And it may be just a matter of you're starting to feel like you're becoming hostile and irritated. So you tell that person, you know what, I just had an idea, or I need to go get something to help fix this situation. I'll be right back. And you leave for 5 minutes and get yourself together. If you don't have the option of bringing another person into it, let them sit quietly for a minute and you leave the room, if it's safe to do so. Okay? Lower or raise your voice when it's appropriate. Sometimes lowering your voice to a whisper makes everybody be quiet and have to listen to you harder. So if somebody's yelling and you start talking and you lower your voice so they have problems hearing, sometimes they really want to hear what you have to say, and so they'll be quiet or they'll lower their voice so that they can hear you. There may be times where it's appropriate to raise your voice. Some people respond to a commanding authority, and that's an option too. I understand you're upset, but right now I need you to please sit down right here. Or you're upset right now, and we can't rectify this situation until you're quiet and we can talk in a cordial manner. And especially with police officers, people at the World Arena, dealing with masses of people, or even our field utility workers, they have to raise their voice sometimes if it's a safety issue. If it's a safety issue, you might have to get commanding and authoritative and say, sit down now. Now, you're still being professional. You're not being angry, but you're just being commanding. And I don't know at the library that you would find that effective. Just some people in general respond to that authority a little bit better. It kicks them into when they were in school and their teacher told them something, or it kicks them back into when they were in the military and the commanding officer was telling them something. So sometimes that's a tactic you can try. If it doesn't work, though, don't keep raising your voice. And when you raise your voice, it needs to be with authority and assertiveness, not in anger. All right? Empathize, but don't say, I understand. Oh, really? You understand. You understand what it's like to be sick and to have a husband who's sick and to have, you don't go down that line. But what you can say is, I can understand why this would make you angry. You're not saying you do understand. It's a little bit different, and it doesn't set people off so bad. Well, I could certainly see how this could upset you. Don't just say that blanket statement, I understand, unless you've actually been in that situation, because it can come back to bite you. What can we do to make this better? How can we fix this? And sometimes, maybe you've tried the third person, but this person, you just get a sense that they want more personal interaction. So in that case, try a different tactic. What can I do to help you today? All right, because that's not accusatory, that's I want to help you. All right, next slide. Okay, so listening skills. Somebody brought up earlier that listening was really, really important, and it is. You're only going to make people mad if they feel like you're not listening or that you don't care. So be attentive. Make sure that you have eye contact with the person and that your body language is open towards that person. Not in an unsafe way, but just in an attentive way. Follow what's being said. You can use facial expressions, gestures. You can lean your body in a little bit, not invading their space, but just a little bit closer to them to indicate that you're attentive and that you are following what they're saying. You can nod your head. Let them know that you're hearing them by repeating what they've said, and somebody said that earlier. That lets us know, as the person telling you something, that you're hearing me. And you don't have to repeat the whole thing back, just enough that that person understands that you're listening. All right, these are things to definitely avoid during a confrontation. You don't start name calling, cussing, swearing, becoming critical. All of those things are unprofessional. All those things indicate to me, if I'm the hostile person, that I'm getting under your skin, that I'm pushing your buttons. And now that interaction is going to be kind of more like a fight and an argument versus you being professional and me just being upset. Don't engage in power struggles, and for the most part, don't order people around unless, again, it's a safety issue. This bookshelf's on fire. Get out now. I don't know. I'm sure you have safety issues here. That's the only time I can think when you would order someone around. Okay. Don't you threaten people. And when I say threaten, I mean on a personal level. I'm going to kill you. I'm going to hit you. Okay. You can threaten to call police or security, but don't make it sound like a threat. Ma'am, if you can't get yourself under control and talk to me in a civil manner, I'm going to have security come over here. Or I'm going to call the police because you're making me feel unsafe. Put it back on them. You're making me feel unsafe because of your behavior. I'm going to have to call the police. Or you're getting into my personal space and it's making me uncomfortable. I feel you're making me afraid that you're going to hurt me. I'm going to go get security. And then some people will say, oh, I didn't mean to scare you. I didn't mean to make you feel that way. It puts it kind of back on them, some guilt a little bit. Any of this could push buttons. Any of these things could escalate someone or de-escalate them. You're not going to know. You're going to have to make some judgment calls here based on each individual that you're interacting with. Does that make sense? Some people, if you now say, I'm going to have to go get security, they might be like, oh, whoa, I better get myself under control. Other people you say that to might make them more angry. You can't read their minds. You're going to have to read their body language and just base your decisions on what to try on how they're acting and the sense that you're getting from that person. Does that make sense to you guys? Okay. Don't minimize their concerns. It's really not a big deal you can't get on the computer today. You can come back tomorrow. Well, maybe it is very important they get on the computer today. So don't minimize whatever's bothering them. Don't argue with them. Don't not listen, which would be ignoring them completely. Don't take it personally. How many times has that been in this presentation? Because I cannot tell you how important that is. As soon as you take it personally, you're not going to be effective in dealing with that person. Do not take it personally. Don't make accusations. Okay? Well, you're the one that, was late on returning the library book, and so it's your fault that you owe this fine. Is it possible there could have been some mistake on the library's part? Maybe it's minimal, but it could happen. It's happened. The police department makes mistakes. So just don't give blanket statements and make accusations like that. Well, this is all your fault. Maybe it's not. Plus, it just makes people feel on the defensive. I and you statements, for the most part, try to avoid, because then things become personal. I and you. And aggressive posturing. What's aggressive posturing on your part? Folding your arms, pointing a finger, hands on the hips, tapping your foot, rolling your eyes. Any of that could be considered aggressive. Leaning in towards a person, clenching the fist, puffing the chest out. Don't do that stuff when you're trying to make someone calm down. All right. If the situation becomes physical, you've tried different tactics, nothing's working. Or, sometimes no matter what you do, it's not going to work. That person's beyond calming down. You can't always fix everyone. Have a plan for what you're going to do if it gets to the point where it's physical. Okay? What am I going to do if all of my efforts fail and now I believe I'm in real danger of a physical attack? Maintain a safe distance during your interaction. The 3-foot rule is what we teach people at the police department. So if I'm within 3 feet of you, now my action is quicker than her ability to react. Within 3 feet, I can punch her, grab her, before she even has time to realize it's coming. Further away than 3 feet, I might still get my hands on her, but she's going to have time to register that I'm coming towards her, and she can do something defensively. So keep people out of that 3-foot zone. You should always be able to do that. Security can't always do that. As police officers, we can't always do that because we actually have to effect an arrest and touch people to do that. But know that if you let someone get within 3 feet, action's now quicker than your ability to react. Does that make sense? So keep people out of that 3-foot zone. 4 feet away or more. Position yourself always so that you have an out, so that you have an exit. Plan what you're going to do if this goes completely sour. What am I going to do if all my efforts have failed and now I'm backed into a corner? There's no escape. The situation could become physical, and we'll talk about that. Again, these are the danger distances. The 3-foot rule is action is quicker than reaction. You have no chance of reacting to defend yourself if someone is within 3 feet. Further away, you do. And these danger zones are for someone who's attacking you. With no weapon, it's 10 feet. If someone's more than 10 feet away, you can get away before they touch you if they don't have a weapon. If they have a striking weapon, like a club or a flashlight or a stick, they could hit you if they're within 3 feet of you, even when you see them coming. Further away than 15 feet, they can't. And a knife is 21 feet. So tests have been done with an armed police officer being charged by someone with a knife. And the best that ever happened was a draw. That knife was on the officer by the time they pulled the trigger. So these are just some things to keep in mind. And if someone has a gun and they can see you, you're in danger. What do you have in the library that could be considered cover? Okay. Cover is something that will stop a bullet. Concealment is something that hides you. So I could get behind this curtain and be concealed, but it's not cover because a bullet could still go through. So books, if you stand on the end of a bookshelf, lengthwise, That will actually stop most bullets, but not if you're standing in front of the shelf. Most of the walls here probably would not stop a bullet. You're talking things like brick, cinder block, concrete, steel, an engine block of a car. Material like that is actual cover. Concealment is you're just hiding and they can't see you. Now, you know, if all you can do is get behind a desk, obviously that's better than standing out in the open because it could deflect the bullet, it could slow it down. You may only be injured instead of killed. So don't just not try to hide because you know a desk won't stop a bullet. I'm just telling you that's not exactly cover, okay? Have you ever had anyone come in here with a gun and threaten? We have an active shooter class, which I really enjoy teaching, which we just started teaching towards the end of last year. It's active shooter survival options for citizens. And it's what do I do if someone came in here right now and started shooting? You know, we talk a little bit about the Virginia Tech shooting and who in those classrooms survived versus who didn't, where they were, what they did that made them survive versus others. It's a really interesting class. And if that should happen in the library, basically your options are evacuate, get out, which is always best if you can, to shelter in place or lock down somewhere, or to attack the shooter. Those are always going to be your three options no matter where you are. But we have a whole class on that. It's really, even though it's a depressing topic, it's a really fun class because you're really getting down and dirty to talk about, okay, this is the worst case scenario, how can I survive it? Physical force should be a last resort, but something you need to think about when you do get backed into that corner. I've tried everything, nothing's working. I made a mistake and I got myself pinned again in a corner where I can't get to the exit. Now what do? I either let this person attack me and assault me, or I do something to stop it. And that's kind of the position you end up in an active shooter is, you know, I can't get away, this person's shooting, I can let him shoot me or I can try to take him out. And you could be pushed into that circumstance here. As a last resort, you need to know that you can physically defend yourself. You don't have to wait for them to put hands on you first. If this person has been hostile, if it's escalated, and you know how to articulate that now, many of you knew how to articulate it before because you told me what belligerent or hostile behavior was. You described physically what people could be doing with their voice and with their body. So if you feel threatened, if you feel that physical injury is imminent, okay, that bodily harm or even death is imminent, you can do something physically against a person before they've done something to you first. So it could be they came in irate, now they're yelling. Now they're clenching their fists and their face is getting red. Now they're coming towards you and you just know they're going to hit you or grab you. You can push them out of the way. You can kick them. You can punch them first because you can articulate that you felt you were in imminent danger of bodily harm or injury, right? I just want you to understand what the self-defense law is here in our state. You don't have to wait for them to throw the first punch, so to speak. If you believe you are in imminent danger of physical bodily harm or death, you can make the first move. But you have to be able to articulate that it had escalated to that point and you felt like you were in imminent danger. Any questions about that? Okay. All right. So, you guys are closed for business. What time do you close? So 6 p.m. or 9 p.m. So it's 9 p.m. just because it's dark and that makes it more dramatic. It's 9 p.m. You guys are closed. How many people are usually here at closing time? Staff? I heard 2 and I heard 4. The branches differ. So let's say there's 2 of you here. Okay, you guys are closed. There's somebody pacing out in front of the library doors. That's how you're going to leave to go to your car, right? What are you going to do? How are you best going to approach this? Maybe they look in the window every now and then. They've tried the door. Is security still here then? Okay, so calling security. Good answer. Okay, so somebody who doesn't have security at their branch, what would you do? Don't go out by yourself, walk with someone else. Would you go out at all? You can always call the police if you're that worried. You can say, hey, we've closed up, and this is going on, and we're trying to leave, but this person's kind of blocking our exit. Can you send an officer?
I was going to say it depends a lot.
Good, and that's a very good point. She said, I would make a judgment call based on the whole affect of the person, the totality of the circumstances. What's their facial expression look like? Are they saying anything? I don't know if you have the ability to talk to people here without opening the door and intercom or anything. I'm getting head shakes, so I guess not. Let's say you do approach the person, that you don't feel they're so aggressive you're afraid to approach them. So let's say you approach the person. What are some things you might say to them? Can we help you? Is there something you need? Go ahead and flip to the next slide. So here are some possible responses. You think there's one here that's better than the others? How about number three? I think that's a good one. I noticed you're out here and alone. We're closed right now. Is there something that we can do for you? Do you need something? You're kind of being neutral. You're letting them know you're closed in a non-threatening sort of way. You're not going out there and saying, we're closed, you need to beat it. You need to get out. We're not open. Right? So number 3 is pretty good. Just don't put yourself in unnecessary danger. And if you're at all uncertain, or your intuition, which you do need to listen to, is telling you something's just not quite right, please call security, call the police department. Keep yourself safe. And you might be in a hurry. You might have somewhere to be. But think about it. What's more important, making that appointment or you get assaulted or killed? If it's that concerning to you and your intuition's really telling you something's wrong here. Okay. Somebody have a question? The question was, you may have a one-time occurrence where somebody comes in and they're just having a bad day today, and that's the end of it. But you get chronic people that come in every week or every day or on a regular basis that are always having a problem, that are always irritated, that are always angry. And if it's a chronic person and you've tried to appease them, you've tried to diffuse them, you've tried to everything that you can, it may be a matter of, you know what, your library privileges are revoked. You can no longer come in here. Every week when you come in here, there's an issue, and we've tried to help resolve that. We've tried to make your experience at the library a positive one. It's just not happening, so we're going to have to ban you from this branch or ban you from using Pikes Peak Library District. Other businesses do this. It's called, we're trespassing you from here, basically, so they give the person a verbal, sometimes written warning that they aren't welcome on the premises. Some places even have them sign a document. You can do this. You always want a witness. Sometimes people will call police when they do this. So that, and then you can also put this person's name and sign a no trespass letter with the police department that's on file at your division so that we know that person is trespassed from the property. That's kind of extreme, but if it's really that chronic and it's happening constantly and it's a situation that you can't really deal with or no longer feel like you should deal with, then that's an option for you. Uh-huh. That's a good question, and I haven't necessarily seen that. He's asking, do certain techniques usually work better with adults or teenagers or certain age groups? And I find that age is kind of a mental state. So I've met some teenagers that are very, very mature, and I can use some of the more sophisticated techniques with them. And then I've run into adults that act like they're 13, and I've had to treat them like a child. So again, you need to play that by ear. And I hate to make generalities, but play it by ear. And the type of kids, I'm sure, that come into one branch are going to be different than the type of kids that come into another. And I can say that I don't normally work with kids, but I've had to fill in at some schools for the officers. And I can tell you that I have filled in at one middle school where the mental capacity and education level of those kids, I thought was more like grade school. And then I filled in at other middle schools where they were very intelligent and articulate, and I thought I was talking to high school or college kids. And so I'm sure you're going to find that in your library users as well. So you really have to individualize your responses to that person as a whole, and not just say, oh, you're a 15-year-old, I'm going to deal with you like this. Or you're an adult, yes, you should be able to deal with an adult a certain way, but that is not necessarily the case. And also, if you get people in here who are mentally disabled, a couple of things just real quick about that. And I've interacted a lot with that community, and I've done some special classes for them. Their sense of personal space is not normal. They want to be much closer to you than we're comfortable with. And that's sort of something I see in that population of the mentally disabled is they don't understand that personal space of stay 4 feet away or more. They want to be close to you and sometimes even touch you. So just something to keep in mind as you look at the overall totality of the circumstances. And just because that person's too close to you, should that make you feel threatened? Not if you know that person's mentally disabled and they're not meaning it as a threat. Because when I teach the personal safety classes, we talk about someone invading your space as a red flag, that they have ill intentions towards you. It's not always the case in some circumstances. Okay, so look at the totality of the circumstances. Some people who are mentally disabled have mental capacities of a 5 or 6-year-old or a 10-year-old, and they're 50. So keep that in mind too. Any other questions, comments? You guys don't all want to go to work, so you just want to stay in here? I have all morning. We can stay in here. Okay, and I will be here for a little while, so if you need to talk to me in private. Thanks.